They didn't say it directly. They never do. They called it a creative adjustment, a necessary shift, a smarter positioning. Dwayne Johnson heard all of it and understood the truth immediately. They were trying to make him smaller. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room high above Los Angeles. The kind of room designed to make decisions feel inevitable. Scripts stacked neatly, coffee untouched, smiles practiced. One executive leaned forward. "We love you in this," he said. "But the character needs to change." Dwayne didn't interrupt. Another added, "Less dominance. More flexibility. We want the audience to feel comfortable." Comfortable. That word hit harder than they realized. Dwayne stayed silent, letting them talk themselves into confidence. He'd learned long ago that people reveal more when they think they're in control. Then the line came. "We're thinking more of a supporting presence," the executive said carefully. "Someone who elevates the lead." The room waited for resistance. They didn't get it. Dwayne nodded once. Not agreement. Recognition. They thought they were rewriting a role. What they didn't know was that they had just triggered the moment he stopped playing by their rules. Dwayne finally spoke. "You're not adjusting the character," he said calmly. "You're adjusting your comfort level." Silence. The smiles cracked. "Just slightly." "That's not what we mean," someone said quickly. Dwayne leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "It always is." This wasn't ego. This was awareness. They weren't afraid of the character. They were afraid of what happened when Dwayne Johnson wasn't contained inside it. And in the next few minutes, they were about to learn the difference between rewriting a role and rewriting the rules. They tried to soften it. "That's not a demotion," one executive said. "It's strategic." Strategic was Hollywood's favorite word when they wanted you to accept less and call it growth. Dwayne didn't react. He looked around the room instead. The body language had shifted, back straighter, voices more careful. They sensed something slipping. Another executive jumped in. "This opens doors. Awards positioning. Longevity." Dwayne smiled slightly, not amused, measured. "You're not talking about the character," he said. "You're talking about control." The room stiffened. "That's unfair," someone said. Dwayne nodded. "Then it should be easy to prove me wrong." Silence. Because no one could. They pulled up notes, story arcs, charts explaining why his presence needed limits, why his authority had to be redistributed. Dwayne listened until they finished. Then he asked a single question. Who benefits from this change? The question hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Not the story, not the audience, not the character, just the room. "That's not how this works," an executive snapped. "This is a collaborative process." Dwayne leaned forward slightly, calm, focused. "Collaboration doesn't start with shrinking someone," he said. "It starts with trusting them." The word trust made them uncomfortable, because trust removes leverage, and leverage was all they had left. They realized then this wasn't about rewriting a role anymore. It was about whether they could still shape the man playing it. And for the first time, the answer wasn't obvious. The shift happened quietly, not in words, in posture. One executive leaned back. Another crossed his arms. Someone stopped taking notes. They all felt it at the same time. This conversation wasn't going where it was supposed to. Dwayne Johnson noticed before anyone else. He always did. "You're overthinking this," a producer said, trying to steer it back. "We're just trying to protect the story." Dwayne looked at the script again, slowly, like he was seeing it for the first time. "You're protecting predictability," he said, "not the story." That landed heavier than expected. Another executive cleared his throat. "Let's be realistic. You're powerful on screen. Too powerful. It changes the balance." There it was. The truth they'd been circling. They weren't worried about the character. They were worried about gravity. Dwayne leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Calm, present, unmovable. "Then the balance is wrong," he said. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Dangerous silence. Because power doesn't like being named. Producer tried one last angle. This is how the system works. Everyone plays a role. Dwayne nodded slowly. Exactly. And you're trying to decide mine for me. That was the moment the room understood the problem. He wasn't asking. He wasn't negotiating. He wasn't bluffing. He had already stepped outside the structure they were standing in. An executive glanced at the door. Another checked his watch. Control was slipping, and no one knew how to grab it back without making things worse. You're putting us in a difficult position, someone said. Dwayne stood up. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to end the conversation. I didn't rewrite my life to fit smaller frames, he said. I rewrote it so I wouldn't need yours. That was it. The meeting was over even if no one said it out loud. Because in that moment, they realized something irreversible had happened. They didn't lose a negotiation. They lost the ability to write the rules. No one stopped him. That was the second mistake. Dwayne Johnson didn't slam the door. He didn't make a speech. He didn't look back to see who was watching. He just left. And the room didn't know what to do with that. They stayed seated for a moment longer than normal, like the meeting might somehow restart itself. Papers still on the table. Coffee cooling. A decision hanging in the air without a signature. Someone finally spoke. So, is he serious? The question revealed everything. They were used to tension, used to egos, used to dramatic exits followed by quiet returns. Talent always came back. That was the rule. Except this time the silence stretched. No follow-up email. No clarification call. No agent smoothing things over. Days passed. Dwayne didn't explain himself to the press. Didn't leak frustration. Didn't frame a narrative. That absence did more damage than any statement could. Because now they had to explain him without him. He's rethinking his direction, one executive said publicly. Privately, the tone was different. If he can walk away from this, someone whispered. What else can he walk away from? That question spread through the studio system faster than praise ever does. Other producers started calling. Carefully, indirectly, not with offers, with curiosity. What happened in that room? What did you ask him to change? Dwayne answered none of it, because he wasn't rewriting one role anymore. He was rewriting the expectation that power needs permission to move. And the more he stayed silent, the clearer the message became. If you try to shrink him, he doesn't push back. He steps out of the frame entirely. And that scared them more than any negotiation ever could. The industry filled the gap for him. That was the irony. Meetings happened without him, yet his name dominated every one of them. Executives speculated. Agents recalculated. Producers tried to reverse engineer what had gone wrong. He didn't even counter, someone said. Frustrated. He didn't ask for more, another added. He just left. That detail mattered. Walking away without demanding anything shattered a familiar pattern. Power usually asked. Ego usually negotiated. Dwayne did neither. A studio head finally admitted it in a closed room. We tried to rewrite his role. He rewrote the leverage. Phones rang. Calendars shifted. A project once considered safe now looked exposed. Scripts were reread with a different lens. Not how to contain him, but how to meet him. One producer tried a quiet reset. New meeting. Softer language. No mention of changes. Dwayne listened. You don't need to explain, he said calmly. I understood you the first time. The room froze. They realized then that the window had closed. This wasn't about fixing a misunderstanding. It was about respecting a boundary that had already been drawn. We're willing to revisit the character, someone offered. Restore the original intent. Dwayne shook his head once. Not angry, decisive. Intent isn't something you restore, he said. It's something you protect. Silence followed. Because protection requires commitment, and commitment costs power. That meeting ended faster than the last. No drama, no disagreement, just clarity. Outside, Dwayne checked his phone. New messages, new projects. different energy. He didn't respond yet, because the rewrite wasn't finished. Not the characters, the industries, and the next move would decide who was actually in control. The questions came quietly at first. Not to him, about him. Executives asked agents. Agents asked managers. Managers asked assistants who had been in the room that day. What exactly did he object to? How far is he willing to go? Is this a bluff? The answers unsettled them. There was no demand, no threat, no hidden agenda, just a refusal to be reduced. That's what made it difficult to counter. A senior producer finally said it out loud during a late meeting. "We can't pressure someone who isn't afraid of losing the deal." That sentence landed like a verdict. Hollywood had always relied on desire, on urgency, on the quiet fear that opportunities were limited. Dwayne had removed himself from that equation. And without fear, leverage collapses. Another studio reached out differently this time. No pitch deck. No revisions. Just a question. "What kind of role do you want to play?" Dwayne paused before answering. "One that doesn't need to be explained after," he said. That answer traveled, because it exposed something most roles avoided: accountability. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about box office positioning or demographic comfort. It was about intention, about meaning, about whether a story could stand without being softened. Some studios backed away. Others leaned in. The line became clear. You either worked with him or around him. And for the first time, the industry realized this wasn't a phase. It was a position. Dwayne wasn't rewriting rules to challenge the system. He was doing it because the old rules no longer applied to him. And that truth was settling in. One uncomfortable question at a time. By the time they adjusted, it was already late. The industry moved the way it always did, slow at first, then all at once. Scripts were quietly rewritten. Characters regained weight. Language in emails softened. Not because of pressure, because of absence. Dwayne Johnson wasn't pushing for change. He wasn't campaigning. He wasn't making examples. He was simply unavailable to be reshaped. A producer admitted it during a late-night call. "We built the system to respond to resistance," he said. "Not to silence." Silence had no handles. That's when imitation began. Another actor declined a rewrite. A director asked for final say. An agent sent back a contract with a single line removed. And nothing else changed. Small moves, big effect. Studios noticed a pattern forming. Not rebellion. Alignment. People weren't copying Dwayne's power. They were copying his clarity. A senior executive finally understood the problem. "If this becomes normal," he said, "we lose the ability to soften stories." That was the fear, because softened stories are controllable. Clear ones are not. Dwayne stayed focused. One project at a time. One decision at a time. No statements. No lessons. Yet every no carried weight. Because when someone with options chooses boundaries instead, it reframes what success looks like. And Hollywood was starting to realize something uncomfortable. They hadn't been rewriting roles for years. They'd been rewriting people. And Dwayne Johnson had stepped out of the draft. The change became visible in the rooms he wasn't in. Meetings opened differently. Fewer assumptions. More questions. Executives stopped saying, "This is how it works," and started asking, "Does this make sense?" That shift didn't come from policy. Came from precedent. Dwayne Johnson hadn't demanded special treatment. He demonstrated something rarer: consequence. When terms didn't align, he left, and nothing collapsed. In fact, things recalibrated. A development executive admitted it quietly. "We thought removing him would weaken the project," she said. "It exposed it." Scripts grew sharper. Characters carried more weight. Decisions took longer but landed cleaner. Not everyone adapted. Some studios doubled down on control. They framed his stance as impractical. "This won't scale," they said. "Others can't afford to do this." They were right, and that was the problem. Because leadership isn't scalable. It's specific. Dwayne's approach didn't spread because people copied it. It spread because it revealed a choice others didn't know they had. Accept the rewrite or write back. Producers began to notice something else. Projects that aligned with him moved faster once decisions were made. Fewer revisions, less friction, more commitment. One executive summarized it bluntly. He's not slowing things down. He's removing uncertainty. That sentence changed everything. Because uncertainty had always been Hollywood's quiet tool. Keep things vague, keep people flexible. Dwayne had removed the fog. And clarity, once introduced, doesn't stay contained. By the end of the quarter, roles weren't being rewritten the same way. Not because Dwayne asked for it, but because no one wanted to be exposed by someone who wouldn't accept less. The rewrite had become the standard, and the system was adjusting around it.by now. Everyone felt it. The rules hadn't been broken, they'd been exposed. What Hollywood called flexibility had always meant control. What they called collaboration often meant compliance. Dwayne Johnson hadn't attacked those ideas. He'd simply stopped participating in them. A studio head tried to summarize it during a closed retreat. "We can't go back," he said. "Once someone proves the system is optional, it stops being a system." That realization came too late. Projects greenlit without him were suddenly questioned. "Why does this feel safe?" someone asked. "Who is this really for?" The absence created contrast, and contrast creates awareness. Dwayne didn't capitalize on it. He didn't rush into deals. He didn't flood the market. He chose slowly, deliberately, letting each decision reinforce the last. An agent tried to frame it positively. "You've changed how they see power," he said. Dwayne shook his head. "I didn't change it," he replied. "I stopped pretending it was something else." That honesty unsettled people, because pretending had been the lubricant that kept everything moving. Without it, decisions required conviction. Some executives resented that. Others respected it. Either way, the landscape had shifted. You couldn't quietly rewrite someone's role anymore without risking exposure. You couldn't assume silence meant agreement. Dwayne had removed the safety net. Not just for himself, but for the rooms he'd been in. And the most dangerous part wasn't that the rules were rewritten. It was that no one remembered who had written them in the first place. Months later, someone finally asked the question out loud. Not in a meeting. Not on a call. Quietly, after everything had already changed. "What exactly did you do in that room?" Dwayne Johnson didn't answer right away, because the truth was simpler than people wanted it to be. "I didn't fight them," he said. "I didn't argue. I didn't prove anything. I just stopped letting other people decide who I was supposed to be." That was the part no one expected. Hollywood had prepared for ego, for confrontation, for negotiation. It knew how to handle stars who wanted more. What it didn't know how to handle was someone who wanted exactly enough, and nothing less. They tried to rewrite his role to fit the system. He rewrote the system by stepping outside it. Not dramatically, not publicly, decisively. And once that happened, everything else followed. Roles stopped shrinking. Meetings stopped assuming. Control stopped being invisible. Not because Dwayne demanded respect, but because he removed himself from anything that didn't offer it. Years later, people would talk about that period like it was inevitable, like it was always headed there. It wasn't. It took one moment of clarity in a glass-walled room. One decision not to play along. One man choosing alignment over access. That's what rewrote the rules. Not rebellion. Not force. Awareness. Because when someone refuses to be rewritten, the room has only two options left. Adapt, or become irrelevant. And that was the moment Hollywood realized. Dwayne Johnson wasn't difficult. He wasn't unmanageable. He was simply no longer editable.